Greetings, and welcome to Chaim's weekly podcast, recorded live in Richardson, Texas. We invite you now to join us for one of our synagogue's Shabbat messages.
How many people have ever been to a national park in the U.S.? A national park, a state park, a national park, anything like that, okay? I went to a national park once. Actually, I've been to a number of national parks. But when I was way back in graduate school, my wife and I, and we had two little children at the time, we decided we wanted to go visit Olympic National Park. We lived on the West Coast, and the Olympic National Park it's a beautiful park. I heard there were gods there, Mount Olympus, all kinds of neat things. But being the poor students that we were at the time, we didn't really have money to hire someone to guide us through the park. So we just kind of showed up one day. It was raining. We had no idea where to go. The park house was closed. And so we decided, well, we'll just hike up this trail. So we get going up there a little ways and ran smack into a billy goat. And it was kind of scary because he wouldn't move. And so we kind of wandered around, and we enjoyed ourselves because I was with my family. It was away from the lab. It was away from school for a few days. We had a good time. But I really have never visited the Olympic National Park. We've been there, but we haven't visited. There was nothing to see. I had no one to guide me, no one to show me the high marks, the low marks, anything of the history. Why is it a national park? All of these sorts of things. And that memory has kind of stuck with me. Also, I'm a man. We don't ask directions, right? I know everything. And so we ended up losing the argument with the billy goat and went back home. But I bring up this story as kind of an introduction into something that I've been studying for a number of years. Well, let me ask you this question. Everyone knows what a millennial is. We know what billy goats are, right? But what is a millennial? 18 to 35 age group. I'm just outside of that. I'm 39 and holding, okay. Again, yes, that's right, yes, yes. It's a treadmill. I'm not getting off of it for a while. It is the millennial generation. I read an article just the other day. The millennial generation is easy to offend in certain ways. So do you know how we can offend a millennial? Well, no, that's my children. No. Wait, they're millennials too. Open the Bible and read it in front of them. This is one of the fastest ways to offend a millennial. I read an article just recently by, I think his name is Eric Metaxas. He does a program called Breakpoint via Prison Fellowship. And he wrote this article pointing out that our modern generation, our postmodern millennial generation, have a very, very negative view of the Bible. So if you want to offend them, just take it out and start reading the Bible to them, and they'll be offended because they have a very negative view of the Bible. But what's also interesting is that only about 26% of millennials have ever read anything in the Bible. They have no idea what is in the Bible. And so it's an interesting conundrum. They have a negative impression of who we are, of what we find most important, but they know nothing about it. When people come to this congregation or other congregations as visitors, like this guy from Israel, it was so fun to greet a fellow visitor. I knew Rob many years ago. I'm not sure he would, well, we won't go there. He might not admit that, but I knew him many years ago when we lived in Dallas. But when visitors come, they very often have absolutely no idea what's going on. I meet regularly with a friend of mine who is not a believer. He is an outsider to the kingdom of heaven. And I was asking him what his objections were to belief in the Bible. He is one of your classic millennials. He doesn't know very much about the Bible, but he grew up in a Christian home. And so he was asking all kinds of questions. Some of them were very good, deep, pointed questions. Others were kind of silly. Like he said, I don't understand. Why you guys raise your hands in the congregation? Has anyone ever asked you that? Maybe they're just afraid to. But these are questions that people have. How do we respond to them? What is our task as believers on the earth? And so I realized that after all these years of studying, I have a prison ministry. Prison ministry is so much fun because you speak to people who have, at least the prisons that I go into, some of them might have an 8th grade education. Some of them are really smart, but they can't string 3 words together because they've been messed up on drugs of one sort or another. Others are trained lawyers from Yale. I had one Jewish guy, no kidding, he was a lawyer from Yale. I haven't met David in there yet. Yes, I have. David and I were in prison together at one point, so a number of years ago. And so I get a very wide variety of people that I get to speak to about who God is and what's these passions that I have about explaining the Messiah and explaining God, the kingdom of heaven to people. So I want to relate a little story, and then we'll get into the beginning of our sermon here. I also do college ministry. I have taught college classes for a number of years in chemistry, but more recently, I've done some Bible studies for students who want to hear from a practicing scientist, why in the world should we believe in the things that I believe in? And this one group that I had, they were mostly biology and agriculture majors. This was a few years ago. They came together, and I thought that they were going to ask me about all the normal things that people do about from scientists who are believers, is, creation and evolution. We're going to argue this. And so I came kind of prepared to talk about this. But I got smart, and I decided, let me ask a few questions first. And some of these people had grown up in Christian homes. Some of them had grown up in Appalachia. They had nothing to do with anything religious, but they were interested in what I had to say. So I began questioning them and asking them, what do you know about what the Bible says, let's say, about the creation? And what was really surprising is none of these guys had any idea what the Bible actually said. And so this kind of began for me a trek to learn how can I speak to them about what's in the Bible without getting into arguments about whether God exists or whether or not it was a 6-day, 1-week creation or 6 ages or something else. We couldn't even talk about being able to perceive God because they knew nothing about the Bible. And so I realized that what we need to do as believers is we need to be thinking in terms of how do we speak to outsiders about our faith? Are we like the billy goat? We just kind of live in the national park and we obstruct people and intimidate them and scare them and knock them about a little bit? Or are we like the rangers and the tour guides, where you go in and you say, I'd like to know about this. What does a tour guide do? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But what I want to do is bring a message from Luke, from the Beatitudes actually, that help us to understand about living in our national park, so to speak. We inhabit the kingdom of heaven, what the Bible calls the kingdom of heaven. Those who are on the outside, they inhabit what is called the world of sin and death. So these are biblical terms. what are the geographic boundaries of the kingdom of heaven? There aren't geographic boundaries. The kingdom of heaven is essentially where his people are. And people come and they want to know about who we are, what are we about, what is the kingdom of heaven about? But they come from outside. Many people who come and visit our congregations are essentially tourists. They come, they want to check us out, they want to know what we're all about. We do some strange things. We pray, we sing, we raise our hands, we talk to someone that you can't see. In another venue, and just one county south of where we live, you'd think that someone was eating mushrooms if you didn't really understand what was going on. And so how can we effectively learn how to be tour guides for the kingdom of heaven without being like the billy goat who's just going to shove you off the path and beat you down? I think I have a clicker here. Let's see if it works. Yes. So I want to read a few passages as we get started here. Our habitation in the kingdom of heaven, very often when people come in and they're tourists and they want to know about us, very often we're tempted to speak to them only in terms of what you can get out of it. So there's a story about an executive who died and went to the pearly gates, and St. Peter met her there, and he said, well, we kind of have a problem because, well, we don't have any rules for your kinds because executives very rarely make it here. But you've been okay, so we're going to give you a choice. And we're going to let you kind of check out both heaven and hell, kind of as a tourist. And so she said, well, I think I've made up my mind. I prefer to stay in heaven. But he said, well, we have rules. We don't quite know what to do with you, so you have to check out both places. So first they got in the elevator and went down a long ways. And she gets out, and this is the place very, very low. She opened up, and there was a putting green. It was a beautiful golf course. The 19th hole was just over there, a wonderful clubhouse. And she thought, wow, this is really nice. And all these people came up, and they said hello. They kissed her. They went out and had a wonderful dinner in the clubhouse of I think it was ribeye and kosher-style lobster. And they were cheering for her, all these other people that she had used to work with. She was having a great time, and before she knew it, her day was up and she had to go back up. She went back up, and then they went to the other place, the pearly gates. And they went in, and she spent the day sitting on a cloud with a harp, singing and having a good time. And before she knew it, her time was up, and she had to make a choice. And she finally went to St. Peter, and he said, well, what's your decision? And she said, all my expectations have been blown out of the water. I thought hell was just a terrible place, and heaven was this wonderful, fancy place, and it turns out that all my expectations are down there. This is what I want. So I'm going to choose that. So they get in the elevator, and they go down, 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 open it up. It's a barren wasteland, and there's fire everywhere, and there's chains waiting for her, and she's shocked. What happened to me? And the devil, now, who was now her guide, turned to her and he said, yesterday was recruiting day. Now you're staff. What picture do we present to people? Do we present to people a picture that the Bible presents, that God gives us, or do we make it up as we go? Do we try to recruit people, or do we turn them away? First passage that I want us to look at, I can almost read that back there. This is in Luke, and it's the famous story of the three servants who were given differing amounts of money or resources, and they were told to go out and invest it for the kingdom. And the first one did, and he said, your 10 talents, or in this case, minas, I've invested them, and they have made 10 more. I've made 100% return on your investment, and here's your money. You might think, if you were a tourist, that, hey, this is great. The guy goes and he invests it. What's his reward? He should get the golf course. He should get the steakhouse at the end of the day. But the reward that was offered to him, that was given to him, didn't have anything to do with the steakhouse. It was more responsibility. And he said to him, well done, good servant, because you have been faithful in a very little thing. You are to be in authority over 10 cities. First thing we have to realize when we're a part of the kingdom of heaven today, here on earth, is that God expects us to be responsible. He expects responsibility from us. He's given us a task to do. And most of the Bible is about preparing us in one way or another for that task, which is being a light to the nations. The task is not to just soak up blessings. So there's a turnaround that we need to understand. What is the first thing that we're asked to do when we come into the kingdom of heaven? This is a surprise to a lot of people, and it was a surprise to these college guys when I began speaking of them of the kingdom of heaven. This is a famous passage where Peter has some preconceived ideas about who the Messiah should be and what he should experience. And so I've just taken a little part out of here. They're discussing what's going to happen to the Messiah. The Messiah said, "I'm going to die." And Peter said, "No, this will never happen to you." And the Messiah turned and said to him, he said, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me, for you're setting your mind not on God's interests, but on man's." Very often, when we want to present the good news to people, we want to present only the juicy parts, not the chewy parts. We only want to present what we think will attract people. But the first thing that we're asked to do when we come into the kingdom of heaven is to deny ourselves, to take up our cross and follow him. We're essentially asked to die in order to be a citizen, an inhabitant of the kingdom of heaven. Are we telling people this? Or are we giving them the recruiting version of the good news? Is the recruiting version the one that says, "Oh, come in and you'll get everything you want. You'll feel good. All of your troubles will go away, and we'll move to Oz," or somewhere like that? Or do we listen to what the Bible actually tells us to tell people when we're describing the kingdom of heaven? Our calling is not to ourselves. Our calling is to a life of service in the kingdom. Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Our calling is to a life of service. About 5 years ago, I spoke here, and I spoke a little bit about what the true calling of Israel was. And I refer you to those notes, but you probably forgot it. The only reason I remember it is because I still had my notes. And so I was able to go back and look at it. The point is, we're not here to gain a blessing. We are here to be a blessing to others. Abraham was told, "You are going to be a blessing to all the nations." The blessing will flow through Abraham to others. And we're reminded in the letter to some people named Hebrews, I think they were Messianic Jews or something like that, that Abraham never saw that blessing come true in his lifetime. He has to wait until the end of the ages. He has to wait for us. He's a witness who is waiting for all this to come true. The only land he ever owned, when he was told, you'd have all this land, the only land he ever owned was a burial cave. Nothing else in his lifetime. He was looking forward to something else. Do we present the kingdom of heaven as something where people get everything they want today, or are we presenting the kingdom of heaven as God intends us to? These are questions that I think we need to be asking ourselves. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and all the families of the earth in you will be blessed. Our task is not to look for a blessing. Yes, it's a nice thing to come here every week. David and I were actually talking about this tension last night between receiving the blessings of the Spirit of God and being a blessing and letting the Spirit of God flow through us. More often than not, we only look to ourselves. We look to say, what can I get out of this? Do I come away from the services with an emotional high? Do I come away from the services just feeling good because I was in the presence of other people? Or do I come away from the service energized and empowered to be a light to those, to be a blessing to those who are on the outside? I believe our major task and our major attitude should not be getting a blessing. God says, I got that covered. I know before you know what you need. And I'll give it to you. So don't seek those things. Only seek for what you need today because, well, tomorrow is a painful time. Tomorrow has a lot of troubles. Today has enough trouble of its own. So only seek for what you need today. And you seek my face instead, and you seek to be useful to me. We're told this in the Torah. There's a connection between Abraham and the Torah and our calling in the Messiah. The commandments, this is Genesis chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. It's essentially the Great Commission. When we walk in his ways, when we follow his commandments, when we live the way he wants us to as a community, we follow his rules, we follow his values, not our own. We're told that this is our wisdom in the sight of all the nations who will hear these statutes and they will say, surely this nation is a wise and understanding people. They will want to know who God is because we are doing his task. Excuse me, I need to get a drink of water. I left Texas for a reason, I think. All the time, so very often we think that the commandments were given to us. This is something that I find to be an interesting conundrum within the traditional Jewish community. We don't have a good understanding as Jews of what our role is. Why are we the chosen people? What does it mean to be chosen? We think very often, it's a very common thing to think that, well, I'm chosen because, well, we're just better than everyone. Or God only loves us and he doesn't love anyone else. But rather, our chosenness is so that we can be a blessing to others. We're chosen to reveal God to the nations so that they will know who he is. And this afternoon we'll be talking more about that subject. Excuse me. How is God revealed to the nations? Where can we see him? Where can people perceive him? You may be surprised at what the biblical answer is to that. But it's all wrapped up in us walking in his commandments and being a community that shines light in dark places. In case that we don't get the point, when we were promised the new covenant in Ezekiel chapter 36, we're told this. It's a wonderful passage. Everyone should know this passage in Ezekiel chapter 36 because it is the promise of the new covenant. So I've excerpted a little part out of this. At the beginning of this promise of the new covenant that would come, where he would give us a heart of flesh and he would remove the heart of stone, and he would be reconciled to us, and we would recognize him and know him and love him and be diligent to walk in his commandments, and he would be with us. We're also told that at the very beginning of this, that this wasn't for our sake. We're told at the beginning and at the end that it's not for the sake of Israel that God is going to do this wonderful thing to the people of Israel. I'm given a new heart, Not just because God just wants to make me feel good, but He's given me a new heart so that the nations will know that He is the Lord. We need to keep this in mind pretty much every day of our life, because we have this old man still within us who wants to be selfish and say, no, this is just for me. I am not doing this for your sake, declares the Lord God. Let it be known to you. Be ashamed and confounded for your ways, O house of Israel. Our task then, when we enter the kingdom of heaven, when we speak to others about the kingdom, is not to bring a blessing to ourselves, but rather it's to learn to be a blessing to others. So we need to turn our expectations inside out to where we're looking outwards rather than inwards. The Messiah spoke in a very similar way to this. This is one of his disciples, Paul. He did not say, let's put God to work for us. But rather, he said, let us go to work for the Most High. There was a famous Texas preacher who once kind of got that turned around. He said, put God to work for you in this divinely ordered capitalistic society. That's not the kingdom of heaven. Do nothing out of selfishness or conceit, but with humility consider others as more important than yourselves, looking out not only for your own interests, but also for the interests of others. Have this attitude in yourself, which was also in the Messiah Yeshua, who, though existing in the form of God, did not consider being equal to God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself, taking on the form of a slave, becoming the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man. Is this our attitude? Is this our attitude, that we empty ourselves and we seek to be a blessing to others? Or do we come here every week only looking to be filled up? Or are we looking here to be empowered so that we can be a light to others? Do nothing out of selfishness or conceit. Consider others as more important than yourselves. This is the calling of the servant of the kingdom of heaven. This is the calling of the one who says that he knows Messiah. This is the calling of those who have been cleansed by the blood of the Messiah and have been given the light of God, not to keep it for ourselves, but to shine it in dark places. Okay, there is, I was told that at 45 minutes exactly, I will be dragged off of the stage with a billy goat. So I'm probably going to skip forward a little bit, because I want to spend a few minutes talking about the passage that really helps us to understand what the Messiah's heart was for us. I'm just going to kind of jump forward here. We'll be talking about some of this in this afternoon. We'll be talking about these two worlds, the kingdom of heaven and the world of sin and death, how they're contrasted, how we relate to people who are in darkness. Because people who don't know the Messiah, even if they live in Plano, Texas, they're in darkness. It's a nice place, but it's a place that is dark because people don't know the Messiah. And so we'll want to talk about that. But I want to, you see, we have a lot about the calling and the tasks of believers. We're not asked to be taken out of the world, but rather we are told that we have to stay in the world. And in fact, this is the scary thing. God calls us out of darkness into the light, and then what does he do? He gives us gifts, he gives us power, he gives us the ability to go back into the darkness. He says, I'm sending them back in there. I have given them your word. The world has hated them because they're not of the world, even as I am not of the world. I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. I usually pray to just have troubles go away. I don't like troubles in my life. But God has given me a lot of troubles in my life, especially in the last few years. I got stupid and tried to start my own business. And I can promise you, when you're flying in an airplane and you get kicked out and you have to build your parachute on the way down, it's a scary thing. This is sometimes what it's like when you start your own business. But God gives us things not to keep us safe, to keep us happy, to keep us warm, but he gives us things so that we can go back into the world with power and with his strength to reach into darkness. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. Our citizenship is in the kingdom of heaven, not in the world of sin and death, which is, by the way, pretty much everything you can see, as we'll see later this afternoon. Sanctify them, set them apart in the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, and think of the fate of the Messiah in the world, so I have also sent them into the world. Do we have that mentality as believers? That God has given us a task to go into the world and to bring the power and the light of God to those in darkness? Or are we just tourists soaking up the sunshine, enjoying the sights, and then going back home in our dark little place where it's warm but dark? Do we have the power that God has given us so that we can go into the darkness, back into the world, and be a light, an effective light to them? Okay, the central text that I want to talk about today is in the Beatitudes. Whoops, that was too far. I'll leave that one up here because this is what I want to talk about. But I want to read this to you, the text itself. This is in Luke chapter 6, verses 20 through 26. I'm hoping that most of you here are citizens of the kingdom of heaven. You actually know what a Bible is. David and I were talking a little bit last night about this, and I had pointed out that there is a real lack of knowledge of the Bible, even in the believing world, in the evangelical Christian world. And so David, in his lawyerly way, decided to push me a bit, and he said, so is this the way we are? And I said, wait, the Messianic Jewish community is kind of an outlier. Every community I've ever participated in or known about in the Messianic Jewish community, we know a lot about the Bible. So we're blessed, shall we say. So I'm going to assume you guys know what a Bible is. Luke chapter 6, verses 20 through 26. These are what are known as the Beatitudes, and they're essentially a training guide. The Sermon on the Mount is spoken to the disciples, and the Sermon on the Mount is not just some impossible standard that we might appeal to someday. It's not anything other than a training guide for the disciples. He spoke to the disciples and he said, the blessed ones, blessed are you, the blessed ones are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you and ostracize you and insult you and scorn your name as evil for the sake of the Son of Man. Be glad in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way, their fathers used to treat the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you are receiving your comfort in full. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for their fathers used to treat the false prophets in the same way. The structure of this gives us an idea of what the Messiah had in mind for his people. He was sending them back into the world. And so if you can see the structure here of Luke, and Luke was especially concerned with reaching out to the nations. We have Luke and we have Acts that are paired together. And Acts are essentially the fifth gospel, where Paul and the others of the disciples, they go out into the nations. They go out into the big wide world and bring the light of God to them. And so Luke had a special concern for this, and he structured his rendering of the Beatitudes so that we could see this very clearly. On the one hand, we have the kingdom of heaven, the first four of the Beatitudes. Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who hunger now. Blessed are you who weep now. Blessed are you when men hate you. Do you realize these are descriptors of the kingdom of heaven? Mourning and hungering and weeping and being hated. These are descriptors of the kingdom of heaven. I don't read many tracts, gospel tracts, that speak of these things. I actually read of gospel tracts that speak of being rich, being well fed, laughing, even in the spirit. That was a joke. Being spoken well of. We all want to be spoken well of. We all want to be well fed. We all want to be rich. Isn't that the American dream? But this is a description of the world of sin and death. And so he compared and contrasted them. Those of us who are in the kingdom, all our expectations are turned around. We die when we come into the kingdom of heaven. And when we die, God then gives us new life, and it's no longer my life. It is no longer I who live, but Messiah who lives through me. This is supposed to be the attitude and the characteristics of those who are blessed. We don't cry in order to be blessed. We are the blessed ones. And because we're the blessed ones, we are poor in our own spirit. Because we are the blessed ones, we hunger now for thirst after righteousness. We don't have all the things that we would like and we need today. Like Abraham, we're looking forward to something else. Like Abraham, we recognize that I don't have everything in myself that can be useful to God. So I need Him to fill me. So I need to be emptied. We cry, we weep, because we know something of the hardness of the world. The disciples had an understanding of this when the Messiah was killed, and they are scattered. They began to understand what it was going to be like. What was the first message that was given to Paul? Remember Rav Shaul, when he became a disciple? Yeah, suffer. I will show him. He went to Ananias and he said, Ananias, I will show you. Ananias, I will show you through him. I will show you. I want him to know all the things he has to suffer for my name. Isn't that a nice introduction into the kingdom? And Paul responded appropriately. He responded properly. I knew it. This is a wonderful place. Everybody knows the answers. This is great. We know the word. Are we using the word so that we can reach into the world of sin and death? Right at the center, we're sent back into the world. Blessed are those, are you when men hate you, when they ostracize you, when they insult you, when they scorn your name as evil for the sake of the Son of Man. These are the promises that we are given from the Most High. These are the promises that we're given if we are doing His job properly. We'll be hated, we'll be scorned, we'll be ostracized, we'll be insulted. Paul had more than his share of insults and ostracism. He was scorned for the sake of the Son of Man. But on the other side of that, when this happens to us, we're glad in that day. We leap for joy, for behold, our reward is great in the heavens. For in the same way, their fathers used to treat the prophets. There's a false that was in my version that I read. I don't know if anyone noticed that. For in the same way their fathers used, it just turned off. That's okay. I only have 6 minutes left anyway, so. But the picture that the Messiah wanted to give his disciples is that you are being trained to be a light to the nations. You are being trained to take up my needs and my desires and represent me before the nations. You're going out into darkness. We need to be separate. We need to be a community so that we can be light in dark places. Remember in Matthew, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount there? You are a light on a hill. You're a city on a hill. You're salt and light in darkness. You act as a preservative. I very recently gave a talk to a men's breakfast concerning Abraham and Lot and the contrast between them. Why did Abraham stop in his discussions with the Most High at 10? Why didn't he stop at 1 or 2? Most people don't understand those, but I have a sense that here many of us will. What is the definition in Judaism of a congregation? A minyan. What's a minyan? 10. If there's a community, even a small community in dark places, they act as salt and light. If we don't inhabit the community, if we don't be a part of a community where we have others that have our back, then we become like Lot. Lot was a righteous man. We all understand that. We're told that he was a righteous man. But what influence did Lot have in the grand scheme of things? None good whatsoever. Lot barely escaped with his life. And his wife was a very good runner, but she didn't look where she was going very well, because we're told that when she was running, she looked back and turned into a pillar of salt and died. You don't like my exegesis there? That was a joke. I have to tell jokes. When I was a professor, I would tell my students, if you don't laugh at my jokes, you won't get an A. Lot did not have any influence because Lot chose to isolate himself from community. We separate ourselves, we become part of a community so that we have each other's back, we care for each other, we encourage one another, because God does not give his gifts in a vacuum. He gives his gifts to people so that we can build one another up for the work of the ministry. So I would ask you to think of these things. Consider these things when you come to worship. Why do you come to worship the Lord? Do you come here to get filled up, to be well fed? Do we come to just enjoy ourselves? Or do we come so that we can learn to be glad when we're doing his work, when we're ostracized? Do we come so that we can be effective intercessors for people who don't have the Lord, who think they're well fed? But you know what's going to happen to them? Woe to you, because terrible things will come upon them. They have their reward in full today. Do we come to get our reward, or do we come to be empowered to bring his word to the nations? So I would pray that we have this attitude in ourselves, just as it was in the Messiah. Empty ourselves. When we come here on Shabbat and we praise him, we're commanded to do all these things. We lift our hands in prayer. We dance before the Lord. We sing beautiful songs to him, and he ministers to our heart. But do we take that home and then just enjoy it, or do we take those things to be empowered to be doing his will in dark places? Are we reaching into dark places? Are we speaking with people who don't know the Bible? That's my dog telling me I have to finish here. So I set a timer so that I wouldn't get in trouble. I learned from that billy goat. I have 2 minutes. Are we going to be effective servants of the Most High? Are we going to be empowered by him to speak to those who know nothing of God? Are we going to learn the Bible in a way that we can tell people what the real story is, not the recruiting version? We don't want the recruiting version. We want to tell people the truth so that they will endure to the end. And when they make that choice to trust in the Messiah, just like entering into a marriage, you take your time. Do we give people a chance to take their time so that we can describe the kingdom and God can do his job, which is to change their hearts? I think that he's waiting up on us to prepare the way, just like John prepared the way for the Messiah, so that he can work on their hearts. He will not work on people's hearts except through his people. We'll be talking about that more this afternoon. Shabbat Shalom. David, can you close us?
For more information, visit us at www.etzheim.org. That's spelled EITZ-CHAIM.org. or join us in Richardson, Texas for our weekly Shabbat services.